Welcome back, minors. My name is Tracy Kriegel, and I'm a counselor here at Student Wellbeing.
My name's April Johnston. I'm also a counselor here at Student Wellbeing, and it's time for your morning cup of joe. So, Tracy, have you ever played Super Mario Brothers?
Lots of Super Mario Brothers. Loved Mario Kart.
Yeah, there's something just satisfying about like shooting the turtle shell, right? Right as they're getting ready to. Yeah. So, I'm more talking about like the original video game.
Right, the original one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just jumping over the little things, getting from the pillar to pillar, and then I always fell off the cliff.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you ever notice like how in Super Mario Brothers that a lot of the levels that the jumping is the same, but it just is how like there's this one scene or this one part at the very end. You've got the stairs going up to the castle, right? And then they'll put like little holes in there at first. And then as the levels go on, it's like they get fewer and fewer blocks. And so instead of jumping, you start off when there's like one hole, then you end up and there's like 3 little blocks you're jumping, right?
Farther and further apart.
Further and further apart
Right.
to try to make it to the flag, right?
Right.
Well, somehow it seems like it seems harder because they took away the blocks that go under the blocks that are kind of floating, even though the jumps are exactly the same. Instead of jumping pillar to pillar, like you said, now we're jumping from like floaty block to floaty block. So why does that seem harder?
Like how so?
So, like, instead of jumping from a pillar that's a brick wide, you're jumping from a single brick to a single brick. And it's the exact same movement, but your landing space is exactly the same. And it seems more daunting because there's all this empty space below you. So now it feels like you're jumping into space.
Got it. I know what you're talking about. So wasn't that pretty common back in the 80s, like with the 80s arcade games? Like I'm seeming to recall like the old school arcade Gauntlet being like that, right?
Right. And that's basically how older arcade games were able to have unlimited levels, was that they would add a few tougher enemies, change up the color scheme, add a few new details, and boom, whole new level. That's how Pac-Man kept you spending quarters level after level trying to get that high score.
Right.
Is you just added a couple things, and like in the original like Zelda game, they would change the difficulty level by changing. You'd have the exact same character, and one would be blue and one would be red.
Totally remember that. Of course, I remember for hours standing at the Pac-Man. Of course, Mr. Pac. It was Pac-Man, and then it was Mrs. Pac-Man.
Right. Whole new game.
Whole new game. That what was the and then it got louder. It got faster.
Well, yeah, because it got like the level just sped up.
I know. I'm not saying the noise correctly, but the little monsters, and then they turn
ghosts.
Different color.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved that game. So,
but that's how they made the level harder. Was they made everything faster. They gave the enemies more hit points. Right. They changed their color, and boom, new game.
Okay.
Like, yeah, that's how they worked it back then.
Yes, loved those games.
So kind of like in these days, you have easy, regular, and nightmare modes. The older games, you just kept playing and playing and playing. And now you can go back and play the whole game again and just up the difficulty level.
Right. Loved the score points, though. Like up there in the top corner, the tally points just kept going and going and going. That was like the best part of it. Just the reward of seeing the numbers go higher.
Yeah, you don't have that anymore.
You don't have that no more. Yeah.
I can't remember a game that used to be standard on all games. I haven't seen that in ages.
Galaga, Donkey Kong, Pac-Man. This is Pac-Man.
Right. They used to all have that little score that would go. Yeah.
And there was the competition. Like 2-player games. It was like his score, my score, her score, my score.
Beat the high score and get it on the. Well, because there were a lot of arcade games back then, and so we were trying to get our name because, oh man, you had your name on the arcade.
Leaderboard.
Yeah, you were.
You had to beat it. Wasn't there like a arcade like challenge like out in California somewhere where like people would go out there and you would play like do you remember seeing that? Like there was like you would go out there and like whoever got the highest score. I know there's a game. I know there's a movie about it.
Yeah, the Nintendo movie. What was it? What was it? Nintendo. It's not the name of the movie's not Nintendo, but it was where they first premiered Mario Brothers 3.
Yes, the kids ran away from home.
Yes,
and they went out to California to get the chance to win
what
the
movie
arcade
is that?
game. That was like a fantastic movie, but they cross-countryed it. And like to get to
I even
California,
watched that recently too because I pulled it out. It was like,
yeah, and then Dad finally had to come find them. But they had the funniest thing that they went through to get to California.
They were
to win the game. Yeah,
they had to get the little brother there because he was like this Nintendo guru, and they were premiering Mario Brothers 3.
Yes, they hid in like a food truck or something to get across the United States. That was fantastic. That was good, yeah. And of course, the kid who they played.
Yeah. Okay, Google has saved the day. It's the Wizard.
The Wizard. Yeah, and it was so great because they didn't have a lot of finances and they were of a lower class and they got there and the kid who had everything and his dad had paid for him to get where he got, and they had this motivation and drive and will to get where they got. So fantastic. I love the movie.
Doesn't it have a Power Glove in it?
Yes.
The old school Nintendo Power Glove.
Nintendo Power Glove. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I loved that movie. So
well, kind of going back to let's kind of go back to our
sidebar.
We're good at that.
Yes, but that's
so kind of like in these games we were kind of talking about how it gets harder by changing small details, but sometimes those details aren't actually things that make the game harder.
Right.
Because, like, in the Mario Brothers, when we're jumping from brick to brick instead of pillar to pillar, it's exactly the same movement. It's not literally any harder. So why do they do it? And it's because they have the perception of it being harder.
Right. Yeah. So, but how much of that is how the person playing perceives the game?
That's what I'm saying. It's all about perception and not about it being literally any harder. So it seems like the perception of difficulty makes the biggest difference in our performance rather than the actual difficulty of the level.
Okay, got it.
So our perception is our way of understanding or interpreting the world around us, but it doesn't always reflect the world only as the way that we experience it. I want you to think of a perception as like colored lenses on a pair of glasses. The color is determined by like our past experiences, our belief systems, and even things we've been told about our past, like our automatic thoughts. All of those things kind of come together, and that colors how we see the world and how we perceive things around us.
Right. So that's basically why two people can have the same conversation and take something different from that same conversation.
Right, exactly.
Right, so it's differences in how they perceive the social cues or even in interpretations of the difference in the two different words, right? And so, and phrases can change how we perceive a conversation and how we take what was said. So it's just like that differences of what you said, what I said, but each person takes away a different context of the meaning.
Right. Yeah. Even think of the differences like from generation to generation, and not to mention culture to culture. A simple phrase can take on an entirely just new meaning just by who said it. Right. I had a friend in high school that was from a different English-speaking area of the United States than myself, and we were talking about a guy that she liked, and so she used a slang term that to her meant that she'd kissed him.
Oh gosh.
But in the area that I was from, it meant that they had slept together. And I was rather shocked.
Oh my.
And she saw my face and she's like, what's wrong? Like, why are you so, like, why is this shocking to you? You know, like 14, 15-year-old kids, and they're like, you know, like kids kiss, right? Like, why is this news to you? And so I'm like, I had to ask her what she meant by it, and then she kind of relayed it to me and told me, you know, yeah, it meant that we kissed, but that's how different.
Sigh of relief.
I was just very shocked. I mean, it was only like the second time they'd hung out. I was like very like, what in the world? And she ended up being like really super embarrassed about it. And she's like, no, we just kissed. And I'm like, but that's how things can quickly go out of
context.
a context, just because of how our perceptions can change things. Because we were having a totally different conversations there.
That's so funny. So if this is the case, what is reality? If we see things differently, we have to figure out what reality is, because it makes me thinking. Well, so let's think about Matrix.
Yeah, like you're having a Matrix moment here.
At this point, if anything is real, are we just a victim to our own brain's interpretation of what's happening around us?
Well, unfortunately, we kind of are. But that's more than our perception. And more than that, our perception is kind of shaped by how we focus our attention. So there's this famous study that was done by Daniel Simmons and Christopher Chabris in 1999. And I love this study. I talk about it all the time. And you put on this video, and in the video, I highly encourage you guys to look it up because it's really funny. They tell you that you're supposed to count how many times this team dressed in white passes a ball back and forth. And so you're counting this ball going back and forth between these teammates. And after the thing ends, it asks you, how many times did the gorilla cross the screen? You're all good. You got the number of times the ball was passed. But you totally missed the fact there was a gorilla.
Right.
There was a man in a gorilla suit walking in not just once, not just twice, but like 3 times. Mm-hmm. This man in a gorilla suit, he's like standing there. Like, he's just hanging out. And then he leaves. And then he comes back. And then, like, he's just there. Mm-hmm. And you're like, I totally missed that. Mm-hmm. How did I miss the man in a gorilla suit? There's only like 5 people in this. Like, it's not an incredibly crowded scene.
Right.
But I'm not paying attention to it. I'm paying attention to the ball and counting how many times the ball bounced.
Right. So it's basically unintentional blindness, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so basically our perception can not only attribute meaning that might not be there, but it can also miss big things like people in gorilla costumes.
Absolutely.
When you were talking about that, I got to thinking, how many times have you been to a wedding shower or a bridal shower? Uh-huh. And they do that thing where they bring in that tray of objects and they tell you to name all the objects on the tray. Uh-huh. And then they come back and they say, okay, what was the bride wearing? Uh-huh. And that's that game, and you're like, I wasn't looking at what the bride was wearing. I was looking at the objects on the tray.
Well, like there's how many jokes do we know of that effect? Like there's this one joke about like you say you're driving a bus and blah blah blah. So many people get off and so many people get on, and then you get to the end of it and they're like, what color is the bus driver's shirt?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, how am I supposed to know that? I've been counting people.
Yeah.
Well, you're driving the bus, so all you got to do is look down. What color is your shirt? So, but it all goes back to that perception. And so now that you know this and you can accept that your perception can be flawed, it can actually help us see reality a whole lot better.
Right.
And it can help us manage our anxiety. Yes. So think of it this way. If I'm going to an interaction that's cross-cultural, I can keep that in mind and possibly avoid some conflicts. And I can remind myself that my fear of spiders might be influencing how big that spider over there looks.
Right. That's good. That's a good point.
It makes me stop and question if my perception is being colored by my past experiences or my fears or my anxiety or anything else.
Yeah, good point. I'm kind of tuning into this, and I can see how that might be a big help on a test.
Yes.
Especially, if I'm intimidated by that test. So I'm going through this process in my brain. So if I ask myself if the test is truly going to be as hard as you feel like it's going to be. So asking yourself, what evidence do you have to support that assumption? So that's the process I would go through my brain. Uh-huh. So if I see that test as like being pretty overwhelming, look at the bigger picture of it and ask myself, Is this test really going to be that hard? Because there's that assumption thought there.
It's going to be hard because my brain's decided it's going to be hard.
So that's that perception. So maybe stepping outside that.
It's kind of like when your parents tell you, because I said so. Your brain's kind of doing that to you. Like, it's hard because I said so. But that's not real.
Yeah. So how do you realistically feel like you would do on the test? I think that's important. And what can I do to score higher on the test?
Right.
I think we have to look at our perception. So I like that. I like what you brought in there. That's pretty good. So it's not that spider's not that big. That test isn't that big. I think I would throw out there as well is, does the test control me or do I control the test?
Right.
Yeah.
All about that perception.
All about that perception. Yeah, very good.
And it can help us by doing that, by deciding, okay, that spider looks huge. Is he really huge, or am I just scared of spiders? Then I can stop and say, okay, am I catastrophizing this situation because of my anxiety, because I am afraid of failure, because I don't like blah, 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 blah? Am I making this out to be something? Like, am I making a mountain out of a molehill and making myself too stressed about this?
So Amber, we're talking about perspective, and I got to thinking tests may be really big and bad, but you mentioned spiders,
right?
And I know we all kind of have this innate. Some people have an innate fear of spiders. Some people just love them and have them at their homes and terrariums and things like that. So, what is the biggest spider in the world? Do we know?
I have no clue.
It's a Goliath tarantula. Do they live here in Missouri?
I hope not.
No, they're in other remote areas of the world, so they're not even anywhere around here. So they're over in. So they're in rainforest regions of northern South Africa, including Venezuela, northern Brazil, Guyana, French Guyana, and Suriname. So they're not even anywhere around here. So we don't have to worry about them. They're about the size of a plate, So they live under rocks and roots. So I don't think we have to worry about those anywhere around here. So then I asked myself, if people are scared of spiders, we all have we have heebie-jeebies here in the office. But then we ask ourselves, okay, so if we're scared of spiders, what's the biggest spider here in Missouri?
I think it's a wolf spider, honestly.
So it's actually the Texas brown tarantula.
They actually live in Missouri?
They live in Missouri. So it's the largest Missouri spider. It's stocky. It's hairy. It's a hairy species. It's uniformly dark chocolate brown and it's reddish.
Never going outside again.
On the carcass base. But it's not poisonous. The bite does sting and it hurts, but it is not poisonous to humans. So we all have this perspective, that spiders are terrible. They're horrible, but we don't have the world's worst here in Missouri, thank God. But, it's perspective. So if we think they're going to kill us and hurt us, we're going to have this perspective that we hate all spiders and we're going to run away from them. But it's perspective. So, all right. So catastrophizing is what we're talking about.
So, yeah, it kind of... especially if we're having those catastrophic thoughts, we have to look at our automatic thoughts and examine if they're appropriate or even if they're even realistic. And we all have times when our perceptions and our automatic thoughts are just not realistic at all. And it's part of being human. Like, our automatic thoughts are going to get catastrophized. Yeah. Like, that's just normal.
Yeah.
We have to kind of rein that back, and so that can cause us to overreact or underreact if our thoughts are out of kilter like that. And sometimes we can even interpret things totally differently than everyone else. It's kind of like that picture where you've got the one person standing, it's a number on the ground, and one person on one end says it's a 6, and the other person on the other end says it's a 9. Mm-hmm. It can cause us to not see things properly. Mm-hmm. So we have to kind of pull back and look at things from the big picture, mm-hmm. and examine our own beliefs about the situation and decide, is this a bird eater spider or is this a regular old brown recluse?
Right, exactly. It's a wolf spider, So, yeah. I mean, it might just be a tiny little spider that really has no significance, and you just, like my husband, he picks it up and takes it outside to let it be part of the life cycle of taking care of flies, which, hey, they do eat flies, which is an amazing thing, and I don't like flies. But
Fair.
I am the one who goes squish, 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 don't live in my house, get out of here. Or goes and gets the bug spray and says, you will not live in my home any longer.
I won't kill them, but it's almost like a Tom and Jerry cartoon with me trying to do the catch and release. Like, I'm just saying, like, it's comical, it's amusing. I will not kill them, but I will definitely look like Tom, not even Jerry. I will be Tom from Tom and Jerry.
They're not
trying to catch it. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
So I think that's our most important takeaway. Perceptions can be flawed, and you've got to ask yourself, am I missing the gorilla in the room because I'm too focused on what concerns me and not seeing the big picture? Or is my own point of view coloring how I see this situation? And is there another way I can look at it?
Right. Yeah, I think it's taking that big picture look. And so, being mindful of the situation. I know we got kind of silly with the whole spider thing. Maybe too much education stuff there, but I think it's just that important piece of being mindful of the situation, looking at the big picture, recognizing that there's a lot going on in that situation, and recognizing that it's not controlling you, you're controlling it, not catastrophizing it. And that's a cognitive distortion, blowing it up, making it bigger than it is.
Yes.
Recognizing that you're in charge of the situation. The test doesn't control you. The spider doesn't control you. You're in control.
I do this visualization exercise sometimes with my clients, in which I'll have them, especially like if you think about a test, I'll have them close their eyes and I'll imagine like a huge ball, like Indiana Jones and the
Temple of Doom?
No, before that.
Raiders of the Lost Ark?
Yes, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I'll have them imagine like big ball, right? And then I will be like, okay, so I want you to imagine the ball shrinking, and it's shrinking, and it's shrinking. The ball's getting smaller. And now it's the size of a car. Now it's the size of a beach ball. Now it's the size of a golf ball. Now it's the size of a marble. And we shrink it down until it's just a tiny grain of dust. And then we envision ourselves holding it in our hand and then blowing it away. Mm-hmm. And somehow that, like, if we imagine the problem or whatever it is doing to that, sometimes it can alleviate those anxious feelings.
So
it's
a great technique.
Thank you for joining us this week, guys, and we will see you next week.
Take care.
For more information about mental health and wellness, contact Student Wellbeing at 204 Norwood Hall. And you can also give us a call at 573-341-4211.
The song Happy Days is brought to us by music from www.free-stock-music.com. You can also add and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook using our handle @S&T Wellbeing.